One big engine versus 5 small ones script, MD. Picture 2 boats sitting at the same dock, both roughly the same length, both hitting the same top speed. One has a single outboard bolted to the transom, 600 horsepower, one motor doing the entire job. The other has 5 outboards lined up in a row, each one much smaller, adding up to more total power than the single engine puts out. Same footprint, same mission. Completely different philosophy under the hood. And the question builders, mechanics, and offshore captains argue about non-stop is which setup actually makes more sense. Not which one looks more impressive at the boat show. Which one actually wins once you're out on the water. Start with the case for one big engine, because on paper, it looks like the obvious winner. A single outboard means a single set of maintenance bills. One water pump impeller, one set of spark plugs, one lower unit to service, one fuel line to worry about. Mechanics who work on offshore fleets will tell you the math straight up. Adding a second, third, or fourth motor doesn't just add horsepower, it multiplies your maintenance schedule by however many engines you bolt on. Annual service on a quad engine setup can run $4,000 to $6,000 a year, and a lower unit rebuild across all 4 motors can hit $8,000 to $12,000. Cut that down to a single engine, and that whole bill shrinks fast. Weight is where a single big engine is supposed to pull ahead too, or at least that's what most people assume. The Mercury V-12, 600 horsepower Verado, weighs 1,260 pounds. That sounds massive until you compare it to running 2 smaller motors to hit the same horsepower number. 2 Mercury 300 Verados, each rated at 300 horsepower for a combined 600, weigh right around 600 pounds apiece. Add those together, and you're looking at roughly 1,200 pounds total, almost identical to the single V-12. So the weight advantage single engines are famous for basically disappears once you're comparing real horsepower for horsepower instead of just counting motors. Fuel economy tells a messier story, and this is where the debate actually gets interesting. A single engine has less drag in the water since there's only one lower unit pushing through it instead of 2, 3, 4, or 5. Fewer lower units means less resistance, which means better fuel economy at a given speed, all else being equal. But horsepower for horsepower, the story flips depending on which specific engines you're comparing. In one head-to-head test, twin 600 horsepower V-12s went up against a triple engine setup from a competing brand making similar total horsepower, and the twins won on speed while delivering 20% better fuel economy at cruise. That's fewer, bigger engines winning outright. But flip the matchup, and 300 horsepower outboards paired up in threes can weigh less and cost less to maintain than 2 450 horsepower outboards making the same combined power. So bigger doesn't automatically mean more efficient. It depends entirely on which exact engines you're stacking against each other. Now for the case for 5 smaller engines, because the redundancy argument is the one that actually saves lives offshore. Mechanical breakdown is the single biggest reason boats get towed, according to Boat US, making up more than half of every tow call logged in a typical year. Water pumps fail, fuel filters clog, electrical connections corrode. None of that cares whether your boat costs $50,000 or $5 million. When you're running a single engine and it dies, you're calling for a tow, full stop. When you're running 5 engines and one of them dies, you still have 4 bringing you home. Lose 2 out of 5, and you're still moving under your own power. That single fact is why serious offshore captains chasing tuna and marlin 100 miles from the nearest inlet almost never run a single motor, no matter how much horsepower that one motor makes. The price gap on this is smaller than most people expect too. A single Mercury V-12 runs about $77,000 and makes 600 horsepower. 5 Yamaha 150 horsepower outboards run around $17,000 a piece, adding up to roughly $85,000 total, only about $8,000 more than the single V-12. For that $8,000 gap, you're not just buying redundancy, you're buying an extra 150 horsepower on top of it. That math is exactly why 5 smaller engines show up so often on serious offshore builds. The backup isn't a luxury tax, it's basically the cost of doing business. 5 smaller engines also spread thrust across a wider section of the transom, which changes how the hull sits in the water. Instead of one massive point of thrust pushing dead center, you get 5 smaller points of thrust spread wide, which can improve how the boat tracks in a following sea and gives the captain more precise control at the helm. Docking a boat with 5 engines used to be something only professional captains could handle cleanly. Then joystick piloting systems from Mercury and Yamaha's Helmmaster EX changed that, letting each engine steer, shift, and throttle independently so the whole boat can slide sideways or hold position at the push of a joystick, even with a stiff wind pushing against the hull. Here's a real boat that puts this exact debate on full display. The HCB 65 Estrella, the largest center console yacht ever built, is available with 3 completely different engine packages on the identical hull. Buyers can choose 6 Mercury 450 horsepower outboards, 6 Mercury 600 horsepower V-twelves, or 5 Yamaha 425 horsepower outboards. Same boat, same weight, same mission, 3 totally different philosophies on how to deliver the power. And when HCB tested switching that boat from 6 of the smaller 450 engines down to just 3 of the new 600 horsepower V-twelves, they measured a 20 to 25% gain in fuel efficiency. Fewer, bigger engines won that particular matchup outright. Then there's the Valhalla V55, a boat built to sit right at the edge of this debate. It comes standard with quad 600 horsepower Mercury V-twelves for 2,400 total horsepower, but buyers can option up to a full quintet of 5 V-twelves for 3,000 horsepower combined. Builders who've run both configurations report the jump from 4 engines to 5 only adds roughly 5 to 10 miles an hour at the top end, even though that 5th engine alone costs around $77,000. That's the diminishing returns problem baked right into stacking engines. Going from 1 engine to 2 adds a massive jump in speed. 2 to 3 adds a lot. 3 to 4 adds some. 4 to 5 adds only a little. Part of that comes down to physics right at the transom. Engines mounted too close together disturb each other's water flow, and each extra lower unit can actually rob a little thrust from its neighbor. Every extra engine you bolt on gets you less benefit for more weight, more cost, and more fuel burned just idling at the dock. If you've made it this far, hit subscribe, because we're about to get into exactly when each setup actually wins, and it's not the answer most people expect. So which one is actually smarter? The honest answer is that it depends entirely on where you're running the boat and how far you're willing to be from help. A single big engine wins on a boat that stays inshore, runs protected water, and never strays more than a few miles from a marina. It's lighter to tow, cheaper to insure, cheaper to maintain, and simpler for a weekend boater to manage. The moment that same boat heads 20, 50, or 100 miles offshore, the entire equation flips, because now a single point of failure isn't just inconvenient, it's a genuine safety risk sitting between you and the nearest land. Multiple smaller engines win when redundancy actually matters more than raw efficiency, which is almost always true the farther offshore you go. They also win when a hull is simply too big or too heavy for one engine, or even 2, to push to a reasonable cruising speed, since no production outboard on Earth right now goes past 600 horsepower. But multiple engines lose when the mission is simple, coastal, and forgiving, because you're paying for redundancy you'll likely never use while burning extra fuel and stacking extra maintenance bills for the rest of the boat's life. So before picking a side in this debate for your own boat, or for the boat you're eyeing at the dealer, run through this. 1. Calculate your realistic distance offshore on a normal trip, not your best case scenario trip. 2. Price out annual maintenance for every engine configuration you're considering, not just the sticker price of the boat itself. 3. Find out what the boat weighs fully loaded with fuel, gear, and passengers, since that number decides how much horsepower you actually need to plane efficiently. 4. Check whether the hull you want is even offered with a single engine option, because plenty of hulls over 40 feet simply aren't rated for it. 5. Factor in resale value, since boats with backup power built in tend to hold value better on the used market. 6. Talk to an actual owner running that exact configuration in your kind of water, because a spec sheet won't tell you what a dead engine at the fuel dock actually feels like. There's no universal winner in this debate, and anyone who tells you there is hasn't spent enough time actually running boats in real conditions. One giant engine is the smarter buy for a huge share of boaters who never leave sight of land. 5 smaller engines are the smarter buy for the far smaller group chasing fish 100 miles from the nearest Coast Guard station. The mistake most buyers make isn't picking the wrong side. It's picking a side before figuring out which kind of boater they actually are. Comment below and tell me which side of this debate you land on, one big motor or a transom full of small ones. And if you want to see exactly what happens when a boat pushes past the 6-engine limit, click that video on screen right now because the story gets genuinely insane from there.